welcome back to the channel. Now, looking forward towards the new regulations coming in this year with regard to the floor and the regulations following that next year. I've watched Formula One for a long time. I understand front wings, rear wings, how they do it, basic aerodynamic things and changes to the cars. But if you look at the Mercedes from recent years and the Williams from recent years and you strip the paintwork off them, I couldn't tell you why the Mercedes is 2.5, 3 seconds a lap quicker than the Williams. Because as we saw when George Russell went to Mercedes, it's not the drivers. So maybe with changes to the floor and seeing how they're going to affect this year and trying to find out what teams can actually do about it to counter the balance, I enlisted the help of an expert. So, Will from FP1. Welcome to the channel.
Oh, expert. That's a scary title to get, I'll be honest. But okay, expert. I'll take it. Hi, I'm Will from FP1, the expert aerodynamicist, with an incredible amount of experience in the field. I've had 1 week working in Formula One. But hey, no, yeah, glad to be here, David. Glad to be here.
Well, out of all the people I speak to on a regular basis, you were the most qualified.
All right.
No, I think the last time we spoke was on your channel and you were at about 550 subs at the time.
Yeah, we're now what, 28 times the size of that. It's been crazy. It's been a wild journey, but it's good to finally return the favor.
Well, glad to have you here. Looking at the changes to this year, for example, I mean, I've referred to aerodynamics in general as being a dark art, is how people talk about it. And obviously it's changed now with CDF and more improved wind tunnel technology and all this sort of stuff, so they can fine tune it a lot more than in previous generations. When you consider the guys from the 60s and the 70s with their whiteboard and a notepad full of ideas, and that was pretty much it. So we've come a long way. With that in mind, looking at what they've done to this year's cars to try and slow them down, what can they actually do to try and get back these points of downforce that they've had lost from them? Because you look at the cars now, the gap for the rear wheel, I mean, any air flowing towards that is going to be like approaching a barn door the size of that thing, isn't it?
Exactly. Now, I think the best place to start is to talk about those changes in the first place. And you obviously mentioned the floor. That's possibly the biggest visual change that we've got. In my opinion, not the biggest. I'll get onto that in a second. But yeah, we have this massive triangular cutout. So all of those little slot gaps in the floor just before the rear wheels to try and direct air around the wheels, they're gone now. And the whole reason for that is because Pirelli, the cars were generating so much downforce, the Pirelli tires couldn't cope. Or they were on the limit. They were approaching the limit. We saw when tires have failed. Looking at say Silverstone last year is a prime example of that. So to basically avoid that, what they've done is they've tried to tone down the downforce, reduce it from the cars, and cutting out the floor, and which is generates a lot more downforce than people think. Takes a lot out of that. The other change is on the rear brake duct. So it's a part of the car that you don't actually see. I guess that you got a massive wheel in the way. But I think it's the fins on the bottom of the brake ducts have been shortened. I can't remember the exact dimension, but they've basically been halved in size, and that's also going to reduce a large amount of downforce to the rear wheels. It's going to make, well, obviously with the cars being carried over more or less, so you get the tokens that the teams can use to spend on particular areas of the car. It could throw up a few surprises. Thankfully, these changes are on the rear of the car, and those are more safe changes to make in a sense. If you change something on the front, however, it can affect the airflow further back. However, if you make a change on the rear, you can tweak the front a little bit easier, a little bit more easily. It has less of a detrimental effect. But that said, we could still see a team gets testing and have a very unstable rear end. I'm thinking the Red Bull, obviously, last season was very unstable on the rear at the start of the season. They began to fix that. We could see that being maybe more of a common occurrence at the start of this season. But yeah, that all remains to be seen. There's a lot to kind of talk about, and there's a lot to see if they can get back. Obviously, the teams are saying, I'll go back to the question you actually asked. Now I've rambled for a bit there, but your question being, how can they get this back? And the answer to that is, well, through a multitude of factors. Firstly, they can just edit other parts of the car. So I make it sound like that's an easy thing to do, but it really isn't. The teams come out thinking this is the limit, this is the best that we can do every single year, and then they keep finding things on top of that. And obviously the regulations are kind of what kind of help shape that up a little bit more and let you find even more concepts like ground effect, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. But the first, I guess, easiest, I say easiest because none of these are really easy, is to find more pace in other parts of the car. So we've seen today, actually, AlphaTauri with their AT02 have come out with this brand new nose design on the front of the car, which looks incredible, I might add. But there's obviously definitely been a change in design philosophy there. And we're seeing a lot of teams going to this more Mercedes style nose, which they've been using obviously since the start, well, since 2015, haven't they? Which is just a nice kind of rounded point. Looks a lot better than the thumb noses as well, in my opinion. And it now seems to be the teams are unlocking, or the other teams are unlocking the pace out of that. So that's one way. The other way is, I guess, making do with what you've got. I know the Red Bull, when that was launched, what was it, yesterday? As we're recording this, they've already got a few turning vanes on the bit of floor that they can use. You've seen Alpha as well. If you compare the Alpha floor to the McLaren one that we saw the other week, I still think McLaren have not shown all their cards yet, but the Alpha one is definitely, there's a lot more curvature in the geometry there, which would suggest that they've worked with, they've found something in that. It might be to try and direct airflow around the inboard part of the tire. Will it have a massive effect? No, it'll be a very, very minimal one, but marginal gains in Formula One is really all that matters at the end of the day. So those are the two sort of key ways. So just to summarize that, taking other parts of the car and improving them to get your downforce back, making do with the floor and in its new design, but it's still going to be very, very detrimental. And you're right, the rear tires are a lot harder to cover up effectively, and that's gonna I think it's gonna change the handling of the cars more than people realize.
Because with a lot more of the aero towards the front of the car to try and wash it out, is that going to increase like understeer, oversteer, do you think, mannerisms? Or
probably more oversteer, I would suggest. I would expect. Just because you haven't got, if a car's going around a corner, there's not so much downforce on the rear end anymore. So the amount of force sticking the rear end to the track is reduced. So the likelihood of that slipping and going out is probably more likely. That's just an educated guess from the way I sit and look at it. But I guess there, I'd say you're looking at more of a twitchy rear end, which is less stable, less aerodynamically stable, and it could throw up a few gremlins in the early parts of the season.
So drivers who consistently don't tend to like that stuff, you're looking at Sebastian Vettel, of course. I do wonder about Pierre Gasly, of course, because when he was partnered with Max likes a front end which is a twitchy rear, and that's why his teammates have tended to struggle, because they've not had a planted, comfortable car under them. And if this seems to be veering more towards Max's comfort territory, so to speak, you do wonder how Sergio is going to react to it. I mean, I don't know.
So it's an interesting one, definitely, with Sergio. But the other thing, we can kind of take note of, and I think McLaren have done this particularly well, is they've obviously a lot of their tokens they've had to spend on basically repackaging that Mercedes engine into the car. But there has been some changes onto the rear wing. How much downforce that will get you? Very, very minimal. What they've done is they've added some horizontal louvers, which they're banned at the top of the end plate, but lower down. If you look at the side-by-side images of the 2020 McLaren, 2021 McLaren, they've replaced some of those kind of vertical fingers, is what we call them, which are these kind of vertical slats in the end plate with some horizontal ones, and that will do a bit to make that rear wing less draggy, and give it a bit more downforce as well. But the numbers with louvers are so tiny. And again, you won't be able to make up the amount that you've lost by cutting out that large part of the floor. So it's going to be a challenge, I think, for a lot of teams. I think with the reduced wind tunnel testing and CFD testing they're going to get as well, is going to be a big factor going into the new set of regulations in 2022 as well. That was the thing I was kind of alluding to at the start. I think really the biggest change here is nothing that we're seeing physically on the cars, but it's the workings of the teams. It's the fact that the teams that are at the top of the championship won't be able to run as much CFD, won't be able to run as much wind tunnel testing as the teams down at the bottom of the pack. So that could, well, and obviously adding the budget cap as well, it could have a big factor. I think it will take a couple of years for that to really kind of show its true light. But there's a lot of exciting things coming, and I think it's definitely going to mix up the grid, especially in the midfield.
Well, we've seen the how the reduction in resources available for the bigger teams in Formula One has affected, say, for example, Ferrari today announcing WEC hybrid. So they're already having to stick some of their or move some of their resources onto other tasks. And having looked where they were last year, is there a tendency or a temptation just to bin this year off completely and concentrate on next year because they were already chasing the pack?
It depends where you are. I mean, I think that the classic examples to go back to between 2010 and 2014. Now, 2010 was when Mercedes started to work on their hybrid engine for 2014. Renault, meanwhile, said, right, well, you know, we're going to maximize the time that we have left. And what that resulted in was this period of dominance for Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel, which worked. Then obviously you get to the 2014 and you completely fall off the pace. Meanwhile, for Mercedes, it was the opposite. They were picking up the odd win here and there towards the end of the V8 era, get to turbo hybrid era, and look what they've done. They've won the last 7 championships in a row with Hamilton and Rosberg. Technically Bottas, but so
Bottas has been good filler.
Yeah, exactly. Good filler until Georgie Boy comes along. But you've got to look at where Ferrari are right now. And are they really going to are they going to challenge for a title this year? No, not at all. Obviously, Mika Salo came out earlier in the week, was talking about them having to run a lower power engine mode. I need to look into that in a bit more detail. It's
something like fuel or something, how they weren't allowed to run as much fuel or as much fuel flow. Or, I mean, my theory on it was basically that maybe it was a poor translation, and he was saying because they'd had to scrape so much stuff off their engine, which was contrary to what the clarification of the rules were. I'll word it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe there would be better this year because they've had a year of more running the engine to find out where they can reclaim some of that power. But yeah.
Ferrari are in a really tough spot because they've got this engine freeze coming as well. They need to find this pace now, or they really risk not just bidding this year off, but possibly bidding off the next few years, because customer teams, they can switch engines. You know, we've seen, you know, the rumors that Williams might switch to Renault power, which I don't understand, but we're getting off topic again. But Ferrari, they're a manufacturer team. If you had Ferrari going to switch to Mercedes engines, that looks incredibly bad, not just to your customer teams, but to you yourself. You're saying, yeah, our engines are so bad, we're not even going to run them. Well,
I mean, Enzo Ferrari used to basically say that he was selling his customers an engine and throwing in the rest of the car for free. So it's come a long way since then in not the desired direction.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, well, it's not a good time to be a Ferrari fan. Sorry, David.
Thank you. At
the moment, I mean, you've had your period of dominance in the early 2000s. You've got to kind of sit and wait on it for a little bit. I'm
a long-term fan. I'm used to this, you know, pattern.
Back in, what was it, 80? Was it 1980? You had that awful season as well.
Yeah.
So you're probably
Relapsed F1 are busy reminding me about it at the minute.
Deanna's brilliant. I love those videos. She's fantastic. But it's Ferrari have been here before. They've dug themselves out this hole before, and they can do it again as long as they don't have another hissy fit and threaten to quit. But it's an interesting one. It for fans, at least, it adds another team to the midfield, and it makes that midfield very exciting. It also gives another team like, say, McLaren last year, an opportunity to snag third in the constructors, which will do a massive amount in terms of constructors championship points. And it's now made P4. That's bad. We don't want to finish P4 anymore. We want to finish P3. It's added that extra kind of step that is now in reach, because obviously before, you know, it was that 3-way fight. well, it was a one-way fight and then maybe a two-way fight if you're calling it for P2, and you weren't going to touch the big three. That's now down to a big two, which makes that midfield battle all the more interesting.
And the thing is, as well, it was technically a big 1.5 for the last couple of seasons because it's been Max on his own versus Mercedes pretty much.
Of course, that changes this year though with Perez, and that will be another interesting factor to look into this year and see, what he can do.
Well, with his extra experience and whatever with cars, he can perhaps guide, give some more experienced feedback to sort of perhaps guide the team more to make it a more balanced car.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see how much they take it. Obviously, they have a car which works for Max, and that's really all that Red Bull care about right now. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with that going forward and how much they'll take Perez's input in, if that makes sense, because Red Bull don't see him as a long-term option. It's not like Mark Webber joined the team in 2007, or was it 7? I think he joined 07 or 08. Pretty sure it was 07 because he was at Williams 06. 07. It's not Red Bull are now this established team. They have this young driver pool coming up. They don't need, they have an experienced driver in Max now. They don't need Perez for experience, and he also boasts a larger salary than someone like Tsunoda or Liam Lawson or Yuri Vips would bring in. So Perez has really got to go above and beyond to prove his worth in that team. And is there much of a point designing a car around a driver who you don't see as a long-term option? I mean, look what they did with Verstappen and look how well that's worked.
Yeah, there's a plus and minus to that, of course, because Verstappen designing a car for him hasn't helped them in the Constructors' Championship. Yeah. And while it works for him up to a point, it's not challenging Mercedes. So maybe a more balanced feedback could give them a more rounded way of going forward.
That's the other way of looking at it. The problem with having Max in your team is Max has a very different driving style and a very unique driving style, which doesn't work for 99% of other drivers. There are some drivers out there that just have this very unique driving style, which only they can make work. Someone tries to copy it, it won't work. And we've seen that with obviously Gasly and Albon getting in that Red Bull and spending half of their laps facing backwards. It just doesn't really work for them. Whereas for Verstappen, he can get the maximum out of that car. But you're right, it's still not at a level where it is able to beat Mercedes. And whether that's all down to aerodynamics, it's hard to say. The engine obviously plays a big factor. It's really tricky to see where Honda are, because the AlphaTauri are back in 6th, but they haven't got the best aero department. Red Bull have a fantastic aero department, are up in P2. So it's we don't really know where that Honda power unit is. Was it better than last season's Ferrari? No. Is it better than Renault? Probably, but by how much? And I don't think it's as big as people think.
The improvement in Honda, I think, has been very noticeable, and from just like Red Bull aren't sad or unhappy to have lost them because that was like their engine. There was genuine improvement there, and it was a good relationship between them. But I can't help thinking if it hadn't been for the COVID crash, basically, Honda would still be going forward regardless of what they say, because they're still racing IndyCar, for example,
Exactly.
So
it's Honda. It's a shame, but there's that engine freeze. So again, it's not something that's going to worry Red Bull anymore. Their future in the sport is secure. People are saying this could be Red Bull's year. I don't think so. I think Merc is still going to be fine. I think all this talk about their engines being a bit having gremlins. I think it's just psychological sandbagging.
Well,
effectively.
Toto has said that Red Bull have the best car, so that instantly means Mercedes are going to thrash them.
I mean, Red Bull haven't even ran their car yet, so you can't say that. Red Bull have not even. They weren't even running it today. I think they were still running the 2019 car today. I think.
I'm not sure. But,
I can't remember.
I know there was talk about how they were going to run the 21 car with the drivers, and that poor Alex was going to get stuck with like the 2019 car to give him something to do.
You got to feel for Alex. Hey.
Yeah. Unfortunately, things either work for you or they don't, and it didn't work for him.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've anyway, back onto the subject, if I can remember even where we were up to with it. Something Mercedes, of course, have said is that they're big fans of Adrian Newey because while everyone was watching what Adrian Newey was doing and trying to copy Adrian Newey, Mercedes for years were doing what they liked and nobody was paying them any attention. And now it's like this year, it's sort of like the final realization of hang on a minute, everyone started copying them.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. McLaren switched halfway through last year. Alpha Tauri have now switched onto it. Alpha haven't, interestingly. Red Bull seem to have maybe spent their tokens on another area of the car. But don't be surprised to see, well, I was going to say Aston Martin. No, they have the Mercedes anyway. So, but don't be surprised to see some of the other teams that are yet to launch. Maybe Haas go for something along that route as well. Williams could be interesting to see what they do. I would be surprised to see a new nose on that car. It really depends where they spent their tokens, because again, it all comes down to the fact that teams cannot, they can't put as much, they can't change their cars as much as they could before because of this token system, because of what COVID-19 has done to the planet and done to the economy and done to this current kind of era of Formula One we're looking at.
Let's say one article I saw said that McLaren had pretty much switched on to next year's car in January. So we basically only looking at one update for them maybe during the season, and then they're going to run what they've got.
I think we'll see a very big update at the start of the year from a lot of teams. And then after that, it's going to be a factor of where they are in the championship. Like if you look at, say, the teams lower down the grid, people like an Alpha or a Haas or a Williams, if there's a shot for them to snatch maybe P8, then they will probably upgrade. They'll keep their car going a little bit longer. I think that's what Alpha was saying when they had their launch on Monday, was that they would basically assess where they're at and basically and kind of be quite fluid with it. There'll be teams already working on the 22 car. They were obviously banned from work until I think the start of this year. So already there'll be a certain section of the department, probably quite a larger section than normal, at that 2022 car already. But it will. It'll be different for every team, and I think it's gonna be quite a fluid process. I'll look at it as they go through the season, and if it's looking like their constructors' championship position is fairly secure, then they'll just switch focus. Especially for the lower down teams, this is an opportunity for them to really, make a step up. You don't want to lose that chance because it doesn't come around very often.
Yeah. I was saying to Ollie, I think that you can very much see the battle for third and fourth being decided by who switches over properly last.
Yeah, exactly. And then who does that benefit in the long run? Well, really, it's the team that finishes fourth in that case.
But, you can sort of see Aston to sort of get their name on the board, trying to be the last of the late breakers on this one this year, just to nab that position.
Exactly. I think it could be really tight. It depends how much McLaren not being able to spend their tokens on other parts of the car has hurt them.
Yeah.
It's going to be pretty. It's that trade-off between how much the aerodynamics have paid off and how much that Mercedes engine switch has paid off. Obviously, going from Renault to Mercedes, it's a fairly big leap. So, hey, and you also got to factor in what teething problems you could have. Less testing this year, less chance to spot and solve those issues.
As we saw with Williams a couple of years ago, the loss of 3 days can be pretty heavy. If your car isn't working, that's time you can't afford to lose.
I think McLaren Honda in 2015, Red Bull in 2014 are other prime examples of that. It really hurts them. For a team like Williams as well, who obviously had that fiasco with Paddy Lowe, it's just, it's not the start of the season that you need. And, the benefit is that every team is in that position. They only have, is it a week of testing? If that might be
3 days.
3 days. 3 days. Yeah. You only have 3 days of testing. That's not very long at all. Go back. We used to have like 3 weeks of testing. We used to have 3 separate weeks at different tracks. Jerez was hosting the Bahrain. obviously, our favorite track, Barcelona. So, it's going to be tight for all the teams. And if there is an issue, and again, as I said right at the very beginning, with these new floor regs, that could be an issue. It's going to be very, very difficult to fix.
Yeah. So it's just, you sort of wonder if they're keeping some tokens back to see basically what other people brought so they can react to it.
I don't think you'd be able to do it that quickly. The thing with a lot of aerodynamic changes is you could add a part which is beneficiary to the Mercedes. If you take the Mercedes front wing, and if you stick that on a Red Bull car, it will probably make the Red Bull car worse, because the front wing, it will affect the rear of the car. If the rear of the car is not set up for that front wing, then it's not going to work. And if you in fact stand more of a chance of stalling the rear, doing something like that, and having a catastrophic issue. At the same time, there's not enough time, especially not within 3 days, to take a massive gamble, not upgrade your car, and then take a stab and say, this looks quick based on testing pace, which is testing pace. And then, go from there and say, right, well, let's add this to our car. That might work, that might not work. It's why, teams were very tentative to switch to the double diffuser in 09. It's why, components, like, even look at the Mercedes nose, for instance, it's taken years and years and years for that to finally kind of end up, or at least versions of that end up on other cars. So it's a very, I always think of aerodynamics. I thought of this analogy earlier, and it's a perfect analogy. Aerodynamics is like walking on a tightrope, and you can take one step forward, but for every step you take forward, there's that risk that you fall over the edge. And in fact, this tightrope gets tighter and tighter and tighter. Not the right word I'm thinking for. Thinner and thinner and thinner. The longer you go along it. So the more steps you take, the bigger the risk. So, and if you take a massive step, you take an even bigger risk. And you really do, risk falling off that tightrope if you're not careful. And we've seen teams do that. McLaren in 2018, Williams in 17 or 18 as well had a dodgy rear wing which stalled. So you've got to be really, really careful with that. And even Ferrari this year, for instance,
it needs to be consistent front to back and worked in as a whole, as a conglomerate of kind of. I don't know if it's a conversation I've had with you before or someone else, but I'm very much the bit part. We'll take a bit from there, a bit from there. It's like if you have a chocolate cake and it's a nice chocolate cake covered in chocolate, it all works aesthetically. It's very pleasing, great. But if you take bits from 20 different cakes, it's going to look a mess.
That's a brilliant. I like that comparison a lot. I might steal that one, actually. It's good.
It's all about the cake.
Yeah, it's all about the cake, which I'm a massive advocate for. Love a good bit of cake.
But cakes could be aerodynamic.
Brilliant. I mean, the only way to really, following on from that analogy, the only way to get that perfect chocolate cake again is to take the entire chocolate cake and redo the recipe from scratch. And that's basically what Racing Point did last year, which is now also banned with these 21 regs. So they won't, albeit they'll be able to effectively do it again because they're keeping over the 2019 Mercedes effectively. They won't be able to do that going forward. So it's going to be very, maybe teams will find a new way to do it. But it's, you can't just copy another car. These ideas have got to be original. And to be fair, that benefits the sport at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah. Forward growth and all that lot. Talking about forward growth, one of the key things, of course, about the 2022 cars, which everyone was talking about, is like the ground effect element of them and reintroducing it for the first time since the mid-80s. Now, well, one of the things I always love about when you look at the 70s or whatever else is, beyond some of the aesthetics being god-awful, challenged only by the 2014 cars, in my opinion, for horrendous looking. But the technology and the evolution and the drive and the vision some of the designers and stuff had, and the sheer creativity that they were coming out with, with ground effects, trying to answer that Brabham with a fan car. It's, the 6-wheel Tyrrell, all of that stuff, the little sparks of genius. And we look at them cars now and they're still standout cars to this day that people talk about. So
the technology was so ahead of its time,
Mm.
and just to catch me up, if you don't know what ground effect is, effectively what you're doing is you're speeding. The whole way of generating downforce is you create a pressure difference. So you want to get a difference in pressure between the top side and the bottom side of the car, and that difference in pressure basically sucks the car to the ground. Now, one way to affect pressure is through speed, and to do that, what they did was they basically sped this air up by basically forcing it through a tunnel. And well, in this case, it was we call them Venturi tunnels.
Yeah.
You still see them actually in wind tunnels now. You use Venturi tunnels to basically speed the air up and let the tunnel run at a lower power and make the tunnel more efficient. But that's getting off topic. Back to the cars though, and the tricky thing back in the 70s was if that air escaped, or if suddenly that pressure difference got smaller and the downforce is reduced, and you can go from generating loads of downforce to absolutely none at all. And if you have a car that bottoms out, for instance, on a straight, you suddenly go from generating all this downforce to literally zero, because you've gone from loads of air going really, really quick through that gap to no air at all. Therefore, no pressure difference, no downforce. It's one of the things that is speculated to possibly cause the Senna accident in '94. We don't really know what happened, but it's one of the factors that we thought the car bottoming out and then taking the Tamburello corner, it had no downforce, it went straight on, and it was obviously that wasn't due to ground effect, that was just due to the cars and their flaws themselves. But it was the high amount of accidents that we were seeing in the 70s due to these cars bottoming out. Bearing the track surfaces as well were fairly uneven. They weren't as regulated as they are now. You have a bumpy track, the car comes up from the ground, you're no longer forcing that air through as tight of a gap, and that the speed is going to reduce, the downforce is going to reduce. If you have that going through a corner, you've got no downforce, you're going straight on. So the team's going to be very, very careful with it. And obviously it's been re-engineered in a much safer manner for 2022. So it won't be, as much of an issue. But that's the thing, it was so ahead of its time, we didn't really know how to make it safe.
That was the thing, is even Colin Chapman, who kind of invented it on a Formula One car, at least, didn't really understand it. Because if you look at like the 79 was spot on, and then rather than doing a straight development of the 79 or continuing with that theme, he then went and tried to change it completely again, and Lotus were then kind of competitive for about the next 3 years and never really recovered. Whereas Williams basically copied the 79, slightly tweaked it, and then they were successful. But
yeah,
then you had, of course, the skirts and stuff trying to keep the cars down, and they got banned. And then if I remember correctly, the suspensions on them were basically rock hard at the time. So to try and help with them a little bit. But then, of course, when they bounced, they took off.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to be really... that's it. They just weren't... It goes back to what I said just a second ago. They were fantastic. They were incredibly clever, but they weren't safe. And we didn't know enough about them to make them safe. And Formula One wasn't really this big advocate of safety as it is now. So they didn't... Well, it's bad when they've had to when the 1970s F1 banned things on safety grounds. That's when it's bad, because at that point they were just like, yeah, we race Halo, don't want that, hands devices, don't need that. It was just fast cars going around. There's a risk to it. Deal with it. Well, that has obviously changed since, but I mean,
it says a lot about safety in Formula One that seatbelts were introduced in about 1974 because it was safer to be thrown out of the car than to be in it.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't realize it was that late. I thought it was 60s that they had, but 74, blimey. And the 70s cars were getting quick at that point, so I didn't know it was that late. But the safety of Formula One in those days was not great, so when they're banning something on safety grounds, it's pretty bad. And obviously in the end that's the way it went, and we lost them for about 40 years, which, albeit was a shame, it's probably saved lives in that time.
Quite possibly. I mean, if you look at 82, which it was, I can't remember if it was 82 was the last year of it, but 2 deaths and various other career-ending injuries that season.
Yeah, it was definitely in the 80s. I forget 82 or 84. It was around the early 80s. But yeah, you're right. We had some high-profile accidents there as well. I can't remember any to name. I can't remember whether Villeneuve's was one.
Oh, 82 was Villeneuve, yeah, but that was the cars just took off.
Ground effect. Yeah, I can't remember whether that was ground effect related to or not, but it's obviously really, really sad. But F1 thankfully has learned from it, and look at Grosjean's crash in Bahrain. That shows the level of safety that F1 have stepped up to. Is F1 still dangerous? Yes, it is. We've seen, obviously with Antoine in 19 that the Halo isn't the, it's not going to save all problems. Motor racing and car racing is still dangerous, and you still got to accept those risks. But we've made such fantastic gains in the last 10, 15 years, which have saved lives, as we've seen in several cases now.
Yeah, as we step back from the technology in Formula One, it gave people a chance to look at it properly, and obviously we have so much more toys available to study it now than they had in the 70s. So I mean, obviously they're not going the full skirts and the full whatever that they had previously, but reworking it enough to make it effective to try and cancel out some of the dirty air off the top of the car. Because that's the whole point of it, isn't it? To try and make it so the cars can run closer together.
Exactly, that's the thing. So obviously, with all the little twiddly bits that we have on the cars at the moment, I say twiddly bits. What I mean by that is obviously the
is that the technical term for it?
Yes, that's that. We have the twiddly bits and the fiddly bits. That's what we call them. But if even the bits that they've chopped off the floor this year would have probably created a little bit of dirty air. We have the little winglets over the tires as well, which helps smoothen the airflow out over the tires for 2022. But if you go back to say 2018, pre-2018 front wings, and you see all of the little canards and aero flicks that you've got on those front wings, they're creating so much dirty air. And just to explain that, F1 cars work best when they're traveling in clean, undisturbed air. So there's nothing in front of them. Basically, the air is coming in more or less a straight line. When you have a car ahead of you, it's taking that air, which is traveling in a nice straight line, and in order to generate the downforce, it's displacing that air in all sorts of directions, and you get these things called vortices, which are basically these sort of spinning columns of air. And if they hit a car, the aero doesn't work as well, and that's why we see cars being so difficult to race nowadays, because those cars don't work well in dirty air. You can never fix that problem. So what they're doing with the 2022 regs is they're removing as much of that dirty air as possible by generating most of the downforce through the floor of the car, which with the Venturi tunnels, that was one of the benefits of ground effect. It didn't create dirty air. And then the other thing they're doing is with the rear wing, you get loads of dirty air off the back of that. So rather than you can't get rid of it. So what they're doing is they're using ways to shift that dirty air up over the top of the car behind, rather than straight into the path of it. So whether that will work, we'll have to see. The wind tunnel testing looks good. We won't know for certain until those cars are out on track.
It's going to sound a random question, but let's say aero novice here. The air over the top going over the car behind them, will it then come down again on the car, affecting the car behind that? If, say, you're at the start of the race and they're running in pack?
It's a good question. I've been asked this before and I couldn't answer it. I honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to say that it will kind of stay in that kind of column of air up at the top. But I think then, you're looking, it could be, dependent on weather, on what the temperature is like as well, as to whether that air falls, whether it rises. I'm not 100% certain. I'd say I'm going to go for a bit of a cop-out answer and say it would depend on a multitude of factors, with the weather being a pretty key one, I'd say.
That's fair enough. I guess part of the problem.
Sorry, I'm not 100%. I don't want to put in an answer that's definitely wrong, but that's what I'd say.
I fully appreciate I've asked you on here because out of the various people we chat to, you have got the best sort of grounding in that field. But what you don't have is a multi-million-pound supercomputer at your
Yeah.
disposal and like a
I mean,
half-scale wind tunnel in your back garden, you know.
you're talking to a guy who's just had to restart his dissertation because the CFD model he built up in the last 6 months is a fundamental flaw in it. So yeah, that we should have that little disclaimer in there as well. But
you
hey,
discovered the fundamental flaw.
I did discover the fundamental flaw. That is true. That is true. That is true.
There you go. We covered basically all the aspects I was originally going to plan on. We've covered a lot else besides, and I've suddenly realized the time now is about 10 to 10, and obviously I still have to look at this. So finishing on a positive note or a normal sort of discussion note, everyone who watches my channel will have already seen yours, but on the off chance someone stumbles across this and they don't know who you are, would you like to give them a bit of a background?
Yeah, so my channel now is basically my attempt to get cancelled, I think is the best way to put it. Can I call myself a Formula One comedian? I guess I've got to at this point.
Well, just in case the aerodynamics thing doesn't work out, yeah.
Exactly. I've got this basically.
More strings to your bow.
That's true. You know, yeah. So basically, what I do is I look at current and past events in Formula One and try to see the funny side of them, basically, and along the way, insult Nikita Mazepin as much as possible.
Always a good choice.
Always a good choice. No one has a go at me for that one.
No, strange that. I don't know why.
Yeah, I know. I thought he had loads of fans.
Well, of all the videos I've done so far, that is the only one where I've had more than 100 views on. There's also the only video I've ever had a dislike on.
Ooh,
I know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But then it has got nearly 4 times the views of any of my other videos. So, you know, there's always going to be one.
I could literally make a video that would please everyone on the planet and they would still dislike it. It's just, that's just YouTube for you.
Yep. I don't know. Right. Well, I am going to let you get off and thank you very much for taking part in this like quick talk over the dark arts. I like that title. I do like that title.
Not far from the truth, I'll be honest.
No, apparently not. We're always learning something new every day. Right. To the people at home, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Leave lots of comments in the section below and likes because that's always helpful. And bye-bye for now. Thank you very much.
See you later.
It's just like, yeah, I'll say it that and I'll say that and it will be fine. And it's like, I hadn't even got as far as my name. I'm already going,
Just take a breath. You got it.
Right. Try not to laugh. But outtakes. So this is going better than the previous two. So, you know, doing well.
There you go.
At this point, I've got sound and video. It's definitely better. Right.